All right. So, welcome to On the Mic with Ed. You are here with myself, Maria Ortiz, and co-host Dr. Zoe Ross-Nash. Today will be all about ARFID. So, we're going to be talking about the diagnosis itself, its presentation, symptoms that align with this diagnosis. And we have a wonderful guest, Lindsey, that I'll let her introduce herself. But she has just been so courageous in coming on here to talk about her own experience, and it's something that we're really grateful. So, I will let Zoe thank our advertisers, and we'll get going today.
Yes, we just wanted to give a special thank you to our advertisers, Alsana. Alsana is a treatment center with locations in Alabama and California, but they also offer virtual IOP programs all over the country. So that could be a great resource if needed.
Awesome. Well, all right. So, Lindsey, we'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit about who you are, what inspired you to come on today, and then we'll kind of jump into it.
Absolutely. Well, hi, my name's Lindsay. I live here in Florida, beautiful sunny Florida. I was diagnosed with ARFID in May of 2019. It was a very scary time for me, but I found that speaking out about it gave me a lot more comfort than hiding from it. So, coming on today is a huge step in the right direction. I'm still technically in recovery. Every day is a challenge. But it feels so wonderful to get my voice heard, talk more about ARFID because it was new to me when I got diagnosed. I'd never heard of ARFID before. So I'm very thankful to be here today and kind of talk about my experience.
Oh, we are
Awesome.
just so glad that you are here. And that feeling that you said, oh, it was like a new thing to me, ARFID, is so
Yeah.
common. It's a new disorder in the DSM,
Hmm.
but it has long histories.
Yeah,
So I imagine that finally getting a name to your experience was scary and affirming simultaneously.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I think that's why we wanted, to do this topic because even people in the field, clinicians, they will literally not even be aware of like what this diagnosis is, much less like the true pathology of it. So, Lindsey, would you share kind of, what is ARFID for our listeners if they too have never heard of this before?
Yeah, absolutely. So ARFID is Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. It mainly surrounds, it could be a fear of choking on food, it could be a fear of vomiting from food, a fear of a potential allergy to a food. With my experience, it surrounded the fear of vomiting with specific foods. So I turned to a lot of safe foods, which became I guess it's hard to say when it started because I feel like it started as like an innocent thing of like, oh, my stomach's not really feeling it today. I'm gonna eat like a peanut butter and jelly, or I'm gonna eat just like some plain rice, see how that feels in my stomach. And it just became like a comfort thing for me. And instead of turning that into a comfort thing and still eating foods I enjoyed, it really turned into, okay, I'm just gonna stick to safe foods, nothing else because I'm afraid of everything else. So that's how mine developed. Also, along with like textures and sensitivity to smells, that was a big thing for me as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I think what you're highlighting is it's this fear surrounding food that doesn't have to do necessarily with just like body changes, weight
Mhm.
changes, some of the other things that people when they hear eating disorder, they assume, oh, people are scared of gaining weight or those sort of things. That this disorder really encompasses a lot of other different, sensory stimuli as well.
Yeah.
Um, just that feeling of like I need to eat safe foods because I have this fear of vomiting. You highlighted, I see a lot in my practice with clients with ARFID, yeah, the textures, if something's not
Mhm.
exactly how they pictured, maybe the food they pictured it looking a certain way and then it didn't kind of come out in that manner. Um, okay, so when did you first kind of notice that this might not just be quote unquote picky eating or, I'm
Mhm.
just taking care of my digestion? When did you notice that this could be a problem?
Um, I think it really was when I started to become afraid of foods that I really, really enjoyed. So, like my comfort foods like pizza, pasta, anything like that that would bring me joy started to bring fear to my life. I thought, acidic foods, like anything that would potentially cause heartburn. I'm like, I don't want anything to do with that. So I knew that something was up when I stopped eating my favorite foods because I am a person that enjoys food in general, I really enjoyed traveling and experiencing new foods. And so when I started cutting that out of my life and sticking to a routine and not even really eating anything that was handled by anyone else but myself, that's when I knew I definitely needed help, and this was way bigger than just me.
Wow. That fear word, while all of the eating disorders are so different, like you could put all of them and probably put them in different diagnostic like
Mhm.
criteria and categories. Fear feels like the common thread between all
Yeah.
of them. Wow, that's so powerful.
It really is. I think Zoe and I are even, we were prepared for this podcast, but actually just hearing your voice, it's really, really powerful, Lindsay. Just, what you kind of go through with your thoughts surrounding food. I hope that listeners can hear this is like a daily, even like minute by minute struggle of like my favorite foods I'm now fearful of. And
Right.
that, it's something that it makes me think too, like this may have had some like impacts on your mental health as well. So how has that journey looked for you, this experience impacting your general health and well-being?
I feel like the best way to put it, or at least when I first started recovery, was that there's two versions of me. There's one that really wants to continue experiencing life and the joys that life has to offer, not just food, but going out and socializing and doing things that I once enjoyed. And there's another part of me that's like, we need to stay safe and continue doing these things. Because if we stop doing these things, we stop doing our safe foods, we stop, you know, isolating ourselves, something bad could happen. We could get sick. So that really put a huge detriment on my mental health in general. I became agoraphobic pretty fast um, because of it, and self-image was a big thing too. So it was just a whole mix of things. Isolating myself became something that I felt was safe for me, but I knew it was bad for me. Once I felt anxious, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just go in my room and just shut my door and shut everything off, and maybe I'll feel better. And I had a little voice that was like, you know what, this is good for you. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't good for me. So it just took a hold of my mental health in general. I mean, I unfortunately have had anxiety and depression since I was 13, so it's not something I'm a stranger to, but it really exacerbated my symptoms when I started experiencing ARFID symptoms.
Wow. You shared about your experience of what meal times looked like when you were in your eating disorder. How did this change when you entered recovery?
So I will say I did not do this alone. I am very thankful that I had an amazing support system, my family. I was living with my parents at the time. All of this was happening. And of course, when you live with someone, they're the biggest observers outside of yourself. So they were the ones that encouraged me to get help. And when I got my diagnosis, I actually was put into a IOP, and I was there Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And my relationship with food changed so much just being there because we had two meals and a snack together, and it was always encouraged. It was never forced, it was just encouraged. So it really started to change after I went into IOP. I found myself, instead of going from not eating anything or just having my safe foods, I was encouraged to have a snack, try something new, encouraged to implement like healthy carbohydrates, healthy fats, proteins, and finding myself really enjoying doing that. So there was a huge, like, whirlwind of a difference just in a couple of months of being in an IOP. That really changed my relationship with food and meals because I would sit in my room and eat alone because I was ashamed. There was a lot of shame and guilt surrounding it. I didn't want anyone to see me just eating a granola bar for the day because that would be my meal, or just eating plain rice because my mom would be cooking dinner and I would say, oh, you know what? I'm not really feeling very good. I'm probably just going to have a snack, and going to my room and eating my snack and not having anyone see me. So, the IOP, I am forever grateful for my nutritionist and my doctor because I don't know if I ever would have gotten back on track so fast with my healthy relationship with meals.
I'm so grateful that that you're sharing kind of what that treatment process initially looked like for you, because I see in my practice a lot this intense fear around higher levels of care and fear of the IOPs and PHPs and res, all the fun
Yeah,
words. And I'm just so appreciative that you're sharing that because it shows like this had a monumental impact
huge.
on
Huge.
sparking that recovery process for you. So Talk to me a little bit about how you've seen ARFID be treated. Maybe what treatment modalities, any fun words that you've learned through the process.
Yeah. I mean, based on my treatment, like I said, I was placed in an IOP, which I'm thankful for. And don't get me wrong, I was definitely nervous to hear intensive outpatient program. I was like, what does that mean for me? Um, but going into depth about it, I knew that I was deserving of the treatment. But depending on case by case, it could be an inpatient program that you have to go to, where you're working with other therapists and specialists and doctors. And so it really depends case by case. But at least for me, I will say, I'm happy that I went the route that I did because that was the biggest step towards my recovery. So having a counselor too, having a real therapist that specializes in eating disorders, specifically ARFID, that was a huge help as well because I was seeing a therapist before, but they did not specialize in eating disorders. So I had to go and do research and find someone, and doing that was also a huge, huge change. So inpatient program, outpatient program, therapy, there's a whole different uh, media of routes that you could go. And it really just depends case by case. So IOP was, I can't rave about it enough. It was perfect for me. So,
I just want to emphasize the importance of an ARFID specialist because,
mhm.
as Maria was talking about, even eating disorder specialists don't work with ARFID. And I am one of those therapists of I've been working in this field since 2018. I've maybe treated three ARFID. It's just not referrals that I get. And as I was preparing for this podcast, for psychoeducation for eating disorder therapists like myself and anyone who's listening, there are actually four types of ARFID. And Maria and I learned this on our SEDS examination. The first one is avoidant or ARFID restrictive,
Mhm.
where there's just not an interest in food. Maybe something biological, just you don't have those hunger cues.
Mhm.
That is going to drive eating. Another is aversive. So Maria and I talked about the matching S's, sensory aversive S. And it's when you don't like the textures of food and the sensations of food. And then the last one is avoidant. So it sounds like maybe that one maps on with more of your experience where you were avoidant of food due to scary consequences like vomiting or food poisoning or choking even. And that's why it is so important. Oh, and the last one is ARFID plus, which is when you're having ARFID, but you're also having some body image concerns. So even an eating disorder specialist might not know ARFID. And
Right.
I want to drive that point home because up until a couple of months ago, I was one of those therapists.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
really appreciate you saying that as well. I am somebody that I now actually treat a lot of individuals with ARFID. It's just been part of my referral source. But when I first started, I knew. So I've already did, I'm a therapist, so I'm a licensed therapist. I've been trained. And then I also got my specialization for eating disorders. But then I actually needed to seek out continuing education for ARFID, sought out extra supervision for ARFID. And I hope anybody that's listening knows like this is the diagnosis that needs special attention and it needs special care. We cannot throw the exact same modalities that we will use for anorexia nervosa at an individual who's struggling with ARFID. Um, I think also for people listening, something that we tend to use is exposure and response prevention. And a really big thing that I see sometimes clinicians miss in the field is they will do the exposure part and they won't do the response prevention. And that's so important. They just start, exposing people to new foods. And I'm like, no, 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 we need a game plan on how to mitigate symptoms. How can we calm our nervous system? And that could look at before a meal, how do we get in the best space that we can be in? During a meal, what are we doing? And post meal, how can we address these symptoms? But I think for anybody listening, exposures are great, but the response prevention is needed.
Yeah,
Is that
that's what
something that was ever thrown around in your treatment, Lindsey? The words exposure response prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. So it didn't start right off the bat with treatment. As we went on, once a week, we would have an exposure meal. So my nutritionist would order us a meal from somewhere, but we would always have the option. There was always food at my IOP that we could choose from, like protein, healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates. So if we were having a really difficult day, we could not eat that exposure meal. We could still have something that was going to fuel our bodies. And I felt like that was really important because there were times where, she would order sandwiches and she would order pasta, and it would really just send this like wave of fear through my body. And I think I remember there were probably two times where I could not get myself to eat the meal. It was just I was overcome with fear. And once I did choose to do the exposure meal, it was like a huge win. And my nutritionist and the doctors that we worked with were just so encouraging. They were never forceful. They were never, there was never any guilt surrounding anything with the doctors, which I felt was so important too. So ERP was something that was implemented in my plan, which really, really helped as well. There were so many different things in that program that just helped me put my best foot forward with recovery in general.
That's why I know you have good therapists because you keep using the word encourage, not force.
Yeah.
What you're doing is so scary, and it's literally interacting with the thing that brings you the most fear. And I imagine that a lot of self-compassion is required during those moments. How are you able to bring that for yourself in treatment?
So that was a hard one. I mean, like I've mentioned before, guilt was a big emotion that I was feeling throughout recovery in general. I feel like the easiest way to put it, and I'll, thank my therapist for this one, but kind of imagining my childhood self and how would I treat my childhood self? I wouldn't guilt her. I wouldn't shame her. She deserves love and she deserves care, and I still carry that with me now. When I'm feeling guilt or fear or anxiety about something, picturing my childhood self and really giving her self-compassion gives myself self-compassion. So that was like a huge tool that I've carried on now, still in recovery, of course, but past that like really detrimental first starting recovery point. Um, I'm still learning, don't get me wrong. I have days where it's hard to have self-compassion, but that tool has become something that's been really huge for me.
Yeah, that kind of like inner child work of, yeah, if you look at that young version of you, would you ever shame her for being fearful of that food, or would you treat her kindly? And I love even hearing you say that this is still an ongoing process for you. And so for listeners to know, um, if you have a loved one that struggles with an eating disorder, sometimes when the behaviors change, they're good to go
Mhm.
now. And I think what you're highlighting is that there are still just some long-standing things that you continue to work on to this day, regardless of timing of when the initial diagnosis or IOP was. Um, I really, I think that's important for people to hear that this is an ongoing thing, that you have to keep showing up for yourself. You can't just now no longer care about that younger version of you. You still have to show up for her. And I think that shows the longevity of fighting for yourself. These are long-term struggles.
Yeah.
Um, and it takes a lot of resilience. So, we're biased as, listeners and co-hosts on this podcast, but I can hear the resilience in your voice through all this. And I love hearing that you're kind of giving yourself and your younger self credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big thing too that was mentioned in recovery, in my IOP is recovery is not linear. You're not going to immediately be okay and nothing bad is going to happen. You may relapse. It's definitely possible. You may have triggers still. It's definitely possible 6, 7 years down the road. So keeping that in mind too of like you may be going through recovery and you may start feeling better, but you also still may relapse. You also still may have really awful thoughts. It's all a roller coaster. That's just how recovery is. And I felt like it was hard to swallow that when I first started recovery of like, so is this going to be with me forever? I don't know. It could be a part of me. It could live inside me. I could still be okay, but I could have moments where I'm like, this food is causing some fear for me. So remembering that recovery is not linear is a really important quote for me.
Yeah, that's a quote that I think carries a lot of people through recovery. It's a special one. Recovery is not linear. What would you say was the most challenging part of recovery?
I think honestly, admitting that I had an eating disorder was a really difficult part of life for me. Um, Admitting it to, friends. Um, I went through a pretty large period of that process, just kind of hiding from the world in general, not really letting anyone see me because of the shame and the guilt. But um, it was really difficult to hear that I had an eating disorder. And I think the main reason for that is because I grew up um I grew up high metabolism. I was pretty just small in general, so I was bullied a lot and I was called anorexic a lot growing up. So that when I got hit with you have ARFID, which is an eating disorder, that kind of took me back to middle school and high school, being bullied for something that I couldn't really control. And now I have a real eating disorder. So it was a really difficult pill to swallow that I had something seriously going on with me. Um, and I think another hard part was just kind of seeing um, how everyone in my life was reacting to how I was feeling, what I was going through, because I could see it in their eyes. They just wanted me to get help, and it was hard to break out of that. Like, I'm fine, nothing's wrong, I'm fine, I've got it under control. I know that I don't, but you got that voice in your head that's like, we got to stay safe, we got to stay here, stay comfortable, don't go out of your comfort zone. So those are two of the hardest things to kind of face with recovery.
That makes me so sad to hear too that actually this diagnosis sent you back to a time where you actually were bullied and called like a name, anorexic, referencing an eating disorder. That actually just kind of breaks my heart. And when people use that term, like this is not something that like a something that we use to describe somebody. You know what I mean? Like it is not an image saying somebody's anorexic. I can imagine that that would be hard because people were saying that in a derogatory way towards you. And now you have a clinician saying a similar thing, but in a way to get help. I imagine that would be incredibly confusing for the psyche to figure out. Like, wow, something was weaponized against me, but now these people want to help me. That feels like it would be a really challenging dynamic.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that the IFS approach landed on you so well because it really did take you back to that younger self time. And you were able to heal her and nurture her in all those ways. That is so special. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So, as you navigate kind of the recovered space today or the recovery space today, how do you approach decisions relating to food of like what is a preference versus what is a fear? How do
Mm.
you navigate those decisions?
You know, I feel like the best way to put it, because I remember kind of going through this too with recovery. What's a preference food versus what's a trigger food, or what is a safe food, or anything like that. So for me, I know that I can go back to like, I don't really have a preference for like seafood, really, oysters. Don't really like blue cheese. There are a few things that I've never liked at all before I even started the ARFID journey. So I can go back to, okay, this is a preference versus I used to love eating pizza and pasta and anything like that, and now I'm afraid of it. That's a fear food. So separating those two was a little bit easier, or at least right now it is. When I first started recovery, it was kind of difficult to know because I had specific foods that I would eat and everything else was pretty much avoidant towards. So, um, yeah, I think it's easier now to separate both of them. I still have some trigger foods, like red sauce is still kind of hard for me sometimes. Occasionally, I still love to eat it, but the discomfort that sometimes comes afterwards after eating it with anxiety and fear still resonates with me. Um, but preference foods, I can just circle back to, okay, I know I've never liked this food, regardless of my ARFID journey. I've never liked eating, you know, oysters or anchovies or anything like that. So that's a preference food.
Huh. I guess I'm curious about the age of onset of your experience. So it was 2019. So you were, how old were you? Do you mind me asking at that
I was
point?
23.
Okay, so 23. So I think there's a big stigma that ARFID only happens in children. And while a good portion of it is significantly happening in children, it does happen in adults. So that's why your story is so particularly important because we need people to know that this is not just something happening in kids. It's not something that they just grow out of. It's not just picky eating. This is a significant mental health concern that requires support and intervention. And also a lot of times eating disorders are like, oh, it's only young girls. And ARFID actually impacts 45% of men.
Oh my God.
Um,
Wow.
45% of people who have ARFID are men. So we need to figure out how to treat men and boys in this
Mhm.
disorder too. So the fact that you are talking about this is so important, and I know it's going to impact so many people.
Yes, and Zoe brings up a good point. Even as eating disorders in general, I've had people come into my office and they're almost embarrassed to be struggling with an eating disorder because they themselves perceive it to be something that happens in their young years or like a high school problem. And it's just so untrue. And I'm going to blame a little bit of like the media for that. A lot of, shows, videos, I don't even want to call them educational resources,
Yeah.
social media resources emphasize a lot of like young individuals struggling. And yes, onset in the 20s can occur, and does occur. Did you find in when you were, sharing with family or friends what was going on, did you have to do a lot of the psychoeducation yourself for your loved ones about what you were struggling with?
Um, in a way, yes. Especially with my parents. It was difficult. I mean, again, I mentioned, I've had anxiety and depression for pretty much half my life. So I'm still no stranger to that, but eating disorder was a new thing, I think, for everyone, obviously including myself. As far as the education goes, it was something that I didn't really mind educating people about, especially my parents. Um, I really wanted to be as open and honest with them about what I was experiencing as possible. And I didn't really know how to explain it. So, doing more research and finding more outlets of like resources, like especially with social media. I tried not to delve too deep into that because it can be triggering for me. But I did find a lot of pages of people that were either just diagnosed or have been struggling for a long time and how, recovery has worked for them and what source of recovery they went through. So letting my parents know was a big one, letting my friends know. Um, was really eye-opening for all of them, including myself. I was nervous about how they would take it, of course, but it was so much easier than my mind played it out to be. It was more like I am deserving of recovery. I want to know how I can go about, finding coping skills for myself and maybe let people know how they can help me cope if they can be a support. So, getting education myself, letting people know. Um, I was a little scared, but I found it to be a lot more enlightening and a lot more refreshing for me, which is why I started my own page on Instagram when I first started recovery. And I noticed that people that I've never seen before, people that they're like, I'm experiencing these symptoms, I'm gonna go see a doctor. It's like, if I can at least tell people what I'm experiencing, they might be going something a little bit different than me, but letting people know about ARFID was something that I really started to enjoy because people were getting help from it, and that's what I cared about the most.
Can you share your handle? I would love to
Yeah.
hear about it and then follow you and tell everyone about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Instagram handle is it's at super skinny to super healthy is the Instagram handle. So I'll send it to you guys too at some point. But I haven't posted in there in a little while, but I try and post periodically. If I'm struggling a certain day, I'll kind of like just let everyone know, like today's like a really hard day. Here's what I'm doing good for myself to help, calm my nervous system. Um, I think that that's just been the most helpful for me and hopefully for other people.
I love that because what we talked about in our last podcast is the importance of representation. And as Marie was talking about, there's a ton of representation for other types of eating disorders, maybe poorly
Mhm.
represented, but still representation. Does anyone watch Abbott Elementary?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
Gregory just
Yep.
shared that he has ARFID, and I had a client who has ARFID and was like, finally, someone in this world, in the media, on TV, has an experience that I have. So I just wanted to also give the Abbott Elementary Gregory has ARFID,
Yeah,
and
I love
there,
that.
there it is.
Yes, the representation, this is something that, yeah, well, it's almost like if you tell somebody I have an eating disorder, what's the first thing that they're going to assume? Well, one, they might question, does your body look like it? Number one,
Right.
right? But then number two, their brain jumps to anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, because that's what they've heard. And I love that you started that page because I would assume that's something that, younger you would have loved to see too, right? Is somebody being like, hey, these are my experiences with struggling with food. It's not what the media is showing. This is how this is my struggle with it.
Yeah.
For somebody who is listening that maybe they're unsure if they struggle with ARFID or might maybe can relate to your story, what would you recommend for them on how they approach meal times, how they take care of them
Mm.
take care of themselves post meal times?
Ooh, that's a good one. Of course, everyone's different. I think that, obviously with the help of IOP, that was my biggest help, of course, but I think that it became a lot easier to have a guide. I was given a guide when we started recovery. So I had a little paper, and gosh, I don't think I have it on me anymore, but I had this little paper of what meal times should look like, especially in recovery. And that really helped me with snacks. Setting alarms on my phone too, which was a little bit daunting at first, but setting alarms on my phone for, okay, meal number one, let's try and get some healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates, some fruit, and some protein. And then in a couple hours, it'll be snack time. So we'll have like a protein bar, or we'll have some fruit, or maybe some vegetables and dip. Really doing anything that will work for you, not one person's adventure, or not like my story. People would be like, I don't think I can set alarms on my phone. I don't think that I can do a guide, but starting with something like that and then building your own journey was something that really helped me the most. I stuck with setting alarms after IOP for a year. That really, really helped me, especially if I was busy. I never wanted to use busyness as an excuse to not nourish myself. So having an alarm on my phone saying, okay, let's go grab a quick snack. Let's sit down for a quick meal. I think that that really builds a healthier relationship with food in general.
And the longevity of it, that you stuck that through for a year, I think that's something that I see really common in my practice is people go, how long is this going to take?
Mhm.
One, I never give them an answer because I don't know
Yeah.
and everybody's different. But what I usually tell them is most likely longer than you'd like is
Yeah.
usually my answer. And that takes a lot of strength and dedication to continue for a year, go, this helped me. I'm going to keep doing this. And I think what you're also pointing out is that maybe your body wasn't either sending you signals about it, that it was mealtime, or maybe you were disconnected from those signals, and showing that it's okay to use an aid. It's okay to have that alarm. People will sometimes say to me, well, why should I need that? I shouldn't need to set an alarm. I'm 30 years old. And I'm sitting there like, no, it is okay. And I just love hearing your acceptance of that, of this helped me and I'm going to continue it for myself.
Yeah.
And I think too that that little girl within you too, you'd never judge her for setting an alarm. You'd be like, set as many as you need, right?
Yeah.
And I really think that if there's any kind of takeaway message for people, I love that you brought up that younger version of self of what would you ask her to do? Would you shame her for taking whatever measures it took to take care of herself and her body? Absolutely not.
Yeah. And I think another thing too that I meant to mention before, with like a difficulty with, ARFID in general, was losing my hunger cues. That was a really difficult journey, getting those back because I knew I had to continue to eat in order to get them back. And of course, when you don't have hunger cues, you don't really want to eat. You don't really feel hungry. So that's what really, the alarm system, that's what helped with my hunger cues in general. Like, I may not want to eat, but it's time to nourish my body right now. So again, I'm happy to mention anything that had helped me because it may help somebody else, it may not, but with the chance that it does, that's that's all that really mattered to me and still matters to me. It's just letting people know that this is real. You may not have heard of ARFID before because like you said, anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, they're always mentioned for eating disorders. ARFID, especially as an adult, not as much, which is why I had never heard of it when I got diagnosed. So,
You bring up such an important nuance in eating disorder work of a lot of clinicians preach intuitive eating. And obviously, ideally, that is the goal. We want to be able to connect with our hunger cues, know when we're hungry, know when we're full, know what we like, know what we don't like. But sometimes, especially earlier on in our treatment process, we need to engage in what you called, or what we call what is it? Oh my goodness.
Mechanical eating.
Mechanical eating. There we go. For some, I was like, I thought manualized, but it's mechanical eating. And that is totally needed at times. And there is no shame about that. So if you're at that mechanical eating part of your treatment, totally okay. It's just an additional like bumper. I call them a bumper. Oh my, why are words so hard today? Well, in bowling, what are those
yeah,
called?
they're bumpers. Yeah.
Bumpers. Okay, we need a little bumpers.
Yeah.
We need the alarm. We need some bumpers to help guide you to your meal.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in using bumpers if you're new at bowling. And then there's no shame if you just kind of want some extra support if you're great at bowling.
Yeah.
So recognize that when maybe you're starting your eating disorder treatment, those bumpers might be needed.
Yeah.
I really like that reference because also you can have the bumpers up and not use them, but they're there in case you did. And
Mhm.
I love that image. I'm going to use that actually in my practice because it's the idea that this is my goal. I'm going to send it down the middle. aka, I'm going to do this challenge meal. But it's also like accepting that if I needed help, though, it's there. And it almost gives you that choice, though, and that little bit of safety. Um, and I think with ARFID, that could maybe look like what Lindsay described as there was those backup meals. There was those, if you cannot do this exposure today, here, that was kind of like your bumper.
Yeah.
Where Maria and I actually met was in a conference, and the main thing I took away from the presentation that we attended is that not everyone can engage in mechanical or intuitive eating. Some people need glasses to see, some people need hearing aids to hear, some people need mobility aids to walk, some people need mechanical eating to eat. And it might just be what is part of their routine. So even intuitive eating might not necessarily need to be the goal.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that that's really important because in the world of eating disorders, we hear a lot of health at every size and intuitive eating principles. All those things are so fantastic. And also with something like intuitive eating, it has to come at the right time, is what I tell people. And I don't even know when and if that time comes for certain individuals. Um, but I think it's acknowledging that ARFID as a whole, yes, we need to tailor treatment towards ARFID. And also, we need to tailor our treatment completely individualized to the client in front of us. Because though Lindsay has struggled with ARFID, Susie might have ARFID too, and their presentations might be very different, meaning their bumpers need to look different. And I think that's why we need to have more research and prevention efforts relating to ARFID as a whole, because I think the field has come a long way. And also, man, I think any eating disorder specialist could give you a list off the top of their head of anorexia nervosa interventions. If this doesn't work, what's next? Like there's just so many lines and options. And I think we really need that with ARFID. We can throw out the fun words of ERP and bumpers, but it's like we need to have some tailored backup plans for individuals. And I think that's where the field still needs to grow. I think the understanding and awareness is fantastic, but even the literature that's out there, it is so minute compared to the literature on any other eating disorder.
Yeah. When I was preparing for this podcast, because I didn't know much about ARFID as much as the other eating disorders, I learned that integrating a speech pathologist can be really helpful for folks with ARFID, especially if they have that fear of choking, because maybe there is something going on with the way that their tongue is moving when they're eating. And a speech pathologist and linguistic can really help you be able to figure out, okay, how do I bite, chew, sip, swallow? And maybe we need additional supports on top of an eating disorder specialist, on top of a dietitian, on top of a PCP. We got to have that whole team approach even for ARFID.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, that idea of even the treatment team looking different is huge. That's actually how I tend to actually get ARFID referrals is usually somebody is actually engaging with a speech pathologist. And then they're like, you know what, actually, I think that there's more of the mental health psychiatric presence going on here. But there is no shame in that too. That's another one though that I think people think they don't even know like what that job is. They're like, well, I don't need to go to a speech. You hear speech and you think talking. And I'm like, no, that's not it. It has so much to do with like, yeah, that bite, chew, swallow, all of those mechanisms in our body. And sometimes we might need that extra support. Lindsay, I'm curious to ask, what are some things that you feel like you can now engage with your life in a positive manner that you might not have been able to when your journey with ARFID was a little stronger?
I will say, as cliche as it sounds, when I was in recovery, when I really first started making progress, I actually started to enjoy life in a whole different way, even before my disorder started. I really started to appreciate everything that life had to offer. And I still continue to do that now. I feel proud of myself and I continue to celebrate the fact that I can go outside and I can work now. When I was agoraphobic, I stopped going to work. I stopped seeing my friends. I stopped going out and doing anything. I was stuck in the house. I was afraid of everything. So I continuously celebrate going outside, being in public, trying new foods, traveling. Everything that life offers now is something that I continue to celebrate and I continue to see as a win because I was afraid that, unfortunately, I thought I was going to lose my life during this really hard disorder. So celebrating the fact that I'm here, I'm able to walk outside, I'm able to go and do things that I enjoy. Um, all celebrations, all wins.
Another mantra that we say a lot is celebrate the wins. And, sometimes for individuals with eating disorders, because they struggle with that guilt or shame, they almost feel like they're not deserving of, celebration when they accomplish these things. And one of the biggest things that I say is man, if we don't celebrate as we go, what in the heck are we doing, right? A little visual that I give to clients sometimes is I'm like, all right, there's a puzzle in front of us, okay? And it's a really small, easy puzzle. But basically, each time that we put in a puzzle piece and it's wrong, we're going to go like, oh, gosh darn it, why did you do that, right?
Mhm.
We're going to do it every single time that we put it in wrong, okay? And we get it done in whatever, 5 minutes. Then for the next one, I give a puzzle and I say for each one that we get right, we're going to high five, we're going to celebrate, we're going to be like, woohoo. We might even get it done in 5 minutes. The process was complete in the exact same manner, but the way to which we got there looked different. And then usually people feel pretty darn different after the celebration. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, this journey, even if it looks similar, if you can celebrate along the way, that feeling of accomplishment is going to feel so different after. And I just love hearing you say, I'm proud of myself. And heck yeah, this stuff is hard. Eating disorder recovery, I stand by is probably one of the hardest things that people might have to do in their lifetime. And yes, you hearing like you felt like you were going to lose your life. Like people need to hear this is not picky eating. This is not, I have some stress around food. You literally felt like you were going to lose your life over this disorder. And I think that's what people need to hear is just the monumental impact that this has on a brain, a life, and experience. And, being able to come out the other side, it sounds like yeah, you just have immense gratitude for the little things before that, seemed to come easy before.
Yeah, definitely.
And can I add on to your metaphor with the puzzle? So going back to that first one of you're doing the puzzle and every time you get it wrong, you are saying, gosh, this is the worst. I'm so bad at this. And then also imagine, then you just toss away the entire puzzle and start back over. So when we knock ourselves off of our journey and feel like we need to punish ourselves for making a mistake because recovery isn't linear, and we just say, screw it, I'm going to do all of the behaviors, that's essentially knocking off the entire puzzle from the table.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to be adding that into my practice because
I
yes,
can't think of words today, but my metaphors are
that
right.
was incredible. Right? Because sometimes what I'll hear, whether the client is struggling with ARFID, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, it's almost like they feel like if they make a mistake or have a lapse or a full-blown relapse, they feel like my progress is gone and throw it all away. And I think that'd be a great visual to just wipe it off the table where we could have just removed the piece and try another one. We could have given ourselves some self-compassion. I think that's a really elegant way of looking at this. And with I'm picturing kind of like even an ARFID case and I'm working with right now, it's almost like if an exposure doesn't go well, there's like this little tendency for him to be like, oh man, and like, I'm not even making any progress. And I'm like, hold on, look at all these lists of foods. And I think that Lindsey is just really highlighting, celebrate every single win in this because you deserve it. And one loss or one struggle does not take away everything that you have done up until this point. And I think what Lindsey's sharing about her journey of the diagnosis was hard. Sharing the diagnosis was hard. And then, IOP, obviously, though so helpful, was so challenging. And the alarms that this is a journey. And each step, if we can celebrate that, man, is it going to make it feel like we are making progress here. Was there ever a time for you, Lindsey, that you doubted your ability to fully recover from ARFID?
Yeah, absolutely. I think throughout my entire recovery, like the beginning steps, I was nervous just in general, especially with exposure meals. Changing my eating behaviors at home too. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can start all over again. I don't know if I'll ever get my hunger cues back. It feels like I'm back at square one. And of course, I had moments where I was like, you know what? I messed up. Forget it all. Forget that I went to IOP. Forget everything. I'm never going to recover. So I've definitely had moments where I've just kind of felt defeated by it all. It just feels way too heavy sometimes, where you're like, you know what, I can't lift this weight. I'm just gonna let it sit here. And maybe this will just be my life. But it took a long time, I will say, in my experience. Everyone's different, but it took a long time for me to kind of gain that willpower back, that mental strength back of like, I'm way stronger than this. I'm not going to let this overcome me. I'm not going to let this take over my life. I have so much to experience. I'm moving to a different state. I've never lived outside of Maine. I had just moved with my now husband. We moved to Illinois together and I was still recovering and it was scary. It was terrifying. And then, COVID hit right when we moved. So it was a whole different thing. I'm like, I don't understand what to do here. So there are so many roadblocks, but there's always going to be a path around it. That's what I found.
So you had moments where you wanted to push the entire puzzle off the table, And knowing that there was a full life ahead of you kept you completing the picture. That is so powerful.
Is there a specific message of hope or encouragement that you'd want to share to a listener if they are struggling in a similar manner today? Anything that you'd want to say to them about keeping going?
I would really just like to say that I know from, of course, personal experience that admitting that something is wrong is so terrifying. Going to a doctor and explaining your symptoms and getting a diagnosis is so just life-changing, terrifying, scary, everything. But not being able to live your life is the scariest thing in the world. Way scarier than anything like that. So I think the best message, at least to instill inside yourself if you experience anything like this, is you are deserving of recovery. You're deserving of love. You're deserving of self-compassion. Sometimes it takes time to experience that yourself. You may need extra support from people, but you deserve all of it. You deserve support and treatment and recovery, even if it feels like you don't. Even if it feels like, this feels way too complex. I don't know if I can break myself out of this shell. I don't know if I want to go see a doctor. You're way stronger than your mind tells you that you are. I know that, you hear that everywhere, but it is so true. When you're put in such a terrible mental block, uh, until you experience that, you realize, you know what? I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna fight this. So just remembering to be gentle on yourself. And again, I'll mention recovery is not linear. You're going to have times where things are really difficult. You're going to have times where things are really good and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to experience this again. And then maybe you'll have another drop. Everything is, recovery is linear, like I said. So, um, just reminder that you're deserving of quality care and support and comfort, all of these things, even if you tell yourself you're not. And you'll get there. It may take time. It may be daunting. It may be, "Ugh, is this taking too long? I'm still experiencing these things." Depending on how advanced you are with ARFID or no, what other, excuse me, any other eating disorder that you may have. You may have a quicker recovery than someone else, or you may have a longer one. It's all different, but giving yourself grace and reminding yourself that um, I'm deserving of love and care and recovery, and I deserve to enjoy life to the fullest.
I think that's probably one of the best closeout thoughts that
Thank you.
that I could think of for today.
Literally,
Man,
as you were talking, I was like, you are so cool. Like, I'm so
Yeah,
glad I got to hear your story. And like, I know I'm a stranger, and just the fact that you had the vulnerability and strength to get on here and talk to us about this, like I have chills all over my body. Thank you so much.
thank you guys so
Lindsay,
much for having me.
yeah, Lindsay, I'm truly impressed. And from somebody who's, in recovery myself from an eating disorder, your candidness and the way that you can tell your story is something that is so inspiring. It really is. You just have this acceptance and this hope about you. Man, and it's just you've had so many challenges and the way that you speak about it, it's just truly inspiring. So yeah, I'm just so appreciative of your voice. I'm so appreciative of your willingness. Man, if this just reaches one individual that feels like I have ARFID and I deserve help, oh my gosh, that's the goal of today's podcast.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you for your voice. Thank you for your tone and just thank you for your ability to be courageous.
Of
Um,
course. Thank you for letting me use my voice and come on here. I'm very appreciative.
Awesome. Well, I hope this is really a treat for our listeners, and I'm really excited for this to be out there for everybody. So I do just want to thank our advertiser, Alsana, again, with their locations in California and Alabama. They also have those virtual IOP options offering to the entire country. So we just wanted to say thank you again to Alsana, and I'll let Dr. Zoe close us out.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay, for coming on the mic with us. And wherever you are, who you are, oh, we're gonna crop that one out. We almost got there. Thank you, Lindsay, for coming on the mic with us. And wherever you are, whoever you are, take a seat with us.